international experience as they're getting their certificates or as they're getting degrees? Could we do more collaborative research that crosses over boundaries and regions? So those are some of the ideas that spurred us to get involved in this initiative, and we're really delighted that you're with us today to learn more about each other and how we might go forward. We've sent a really short survey monkey out to all of you and to the 56 institutions that we've identified so far around the world, and many of you have sent back answers to us. We don't have a complete set of data yet, so I'm not going to use a lot of percents or numbers, but I thought I would just give you an idea of where we are so far. We find that we have research, teaching, or academic institutions located in all of the regions of the world. We have at least 2 in Africa that we're aware of, 3 in the Middle East, 4, possibly 5 in Asia, about that many in Latin America, and probably not surprising to most of you, a large number of these institutions located in North America, and then coming in second, many, many institutions across Europe. I think that partly this represents the fact that we're not aware of all of the institutions that are out there, and so we'd really like your help in telling us that our list is incomplete and adding institutions as you become aware of them. We find that many of them have come into existence just in the last 3, 4, or 5 years. So this is clearly a growing field, one in which we're going to see the emergence of new institutions as we go along. I see that you have now in front of you on your screen a chart that gives an idea about what is the main focus of those academic and independent institutions that we've been able to identify. And clearly, research as a primary activity dominates, with about 25 of you answering that that's your primary activity if you're in the academic field, and 5 if you're more of an independent organization. But interestingly to me, most of these organizations are multitasking. So they're not only doing research, but they're also offering certificate training, or they're offering degrees, or they're doing consulting. So most of these are organizations where their activities cross over, and I'm sure cross-fertilize each other. As you can see here, second in order of importance is teaching for degrees. I think we can safely say that most of that is taking place in Europe and in the United States, but there are places in Cameroon, for example, that offer a PhD in philanthropy. So we're learning that we do have potential partners in interesting places around the world. And then when it says teaching for training, we mean short courses, seminars, certificate, and perhaps diploma programs. And that's the third most frequently mentioned focus activity. And then finally, and I found this one interesting, we've come across about 10 institutions that combine one of the other teaching or research activities with consulting. And I guess that was a little bit of a surprise to me. I didn't expect so many of you to be engaged in consulting, but we have a feeling that that is emerging probably as a good business model, a good way for bringing in some revenue to these organizations to offer focused and tailored consulting to individual institutions. Moving on, we also asked you what are the challenges that you face in doing your work on a day-to-day basis. And not unexpectedly, what we found is that most organizations who answered that question said that funding or finding money for scholarships so students could attend their programs was their dominant challenge. But others also said interesting things like they would like to have a more regional scope, or they would like to be doing more international activities than they were able to. And just as soon as we have fuller data on all of you, we're certainly going to be feeding that back to you, and you'll be able to see these results as well. I just would like to not do it quite yet until we get a few more responses back. What I am going to suggest to Jasmine is that following this session, we share the names of the 56 institutions that we've identified so far with all of you, because I think that would enable you to take a quick look and, as I said before, let us know if you're aware of an academic, teaching, or research institution that we might have missed. We want to have as complete a list as possible. Now, I think I'm not going to take up any more time right now because we have 3 other very interesting speakers today. I'm going to hand off next to Professor Les Lenkoswky. He's at the Lilly Family School at Purdue University in Indianapolis. He's a dear and an old friend of mine, and someone whose career has spanned philanthropy, public service in national government, and for the last few years, teaching and research. And as I think many of you know, the Lilly School is one of the oldest and largest institutions working in the fields of research and training, located in the United States. And Les is going to talk to us a little bit today about some of the prominent research, about the evolution of the Lilly School, and how he thinks we might approach smarter philanthropy. Les, take it away.
Thank you very much, Barbara. And let me just get this up here. Good day, everyone, wherever you are. It's been an exciting week here for the Lilly School of Philanthropy. Last Tuesday, we unveiled what is probably our most important publication, Giving USA, which covers philanthropic giving in the United States during the year 2015. We publish it with it's published by the Giving USA Foundation, but my colleagues at the School of Philanthropy do the research for it. Each year, it is the authoritative guide to how much Americans donate to all kinds of charities. Good research, there's an old American saying that it's not ignorance that really hurts, it's finding out that what you thought was true just ain't so. And this is as true in philanthropy as it is in any other areas. We often think of things as true, but when we do the research, we find maybe they're not so, and that in turn helps us understand what we need to do in terms of action. And I'm just going to give you a couple of highlights of the latest Giving USA to point that out. The first one that's on your screen now is the overall number. Last year, Americans gave to charity something like $375 billion, and the big news was that giving in inflation-adjusted terms had gone up by 4% in 2015 over the amount recorded in 2014. But as you can see from this chart, the real story is a little more complicated, because in 2014 we had seen a growth of 6.1%. And then if you look at all the different sources of growth, foundations, bequests, corporations, the only source of growth that actually went up in 2015 was individual giving compared to 2014. In each case, the growth rate was slower in 2015 than it had been in 2014. 2014, suggesting that while giving reached a record high in the United States, in fact, its growth rate was slowing, which probably reflects the slowdown in the American economy. Here's a chart of giving as a percentage of what we call disposable personal income. And as you can see, giving roughly follows the economy. So in the period 2007 well into 2011, as a percentage of disposable income, giving was down. It rose a little bit, but it is more or less plateaued. So this information reinforces what a lot of charities in the United States understand, which is needs are increasing, the number of organizations are increasing, but donations, or they're going up in dollar amounts, remain pretty much at a plateau, if not declining, as a percent of personal income. Now let me show you a second finding that may come as a surprise to some people. We also map where the money goes. And here, this is a little bit of a complex chart, but here you can see year-to-year changes in where the money's been going, where giving private donations have gone. So as you can see, in 2015, giving to education went up compared to the year before, quite a bit, slightly for human services, slightly for public society benefit, which is a kind of catch-all category, and enormously for international affairs. In all other categories, it went down. In fact, gifts to foundations, to fund the assets of foundations, went down by 4%, suggesting that people who might otherwise have the resources to create or expand foundations are looking elsewhere to give their money for their philanthropic purposes. But what about this international affairs? Here is a chart that traces in both inflation-adjusted terms and current dollars international affairs over giving to international affairs over many years. Now, a big chunk of this growth rate, particularly after 1995 or 2000, reflected the growing influence of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in this field, a large portion of their money going internationally. But then we saw a drop down, and now we're seeing an increase. Why? Well, there are plenty of reasons. Could be that there have been some causes, some places that attracted donor support. Could also be that American donors are becoming more interested in international affairs. But whatever the case, the idea that Americans aren't giving a lot to international affairs is contradicted by this chart. It tells us something that we didn't really know. And that, too, would be useful to organizations working in international affairs. It may very well be that the prospects for raising donations in the United States are growing. Well, these are just two charts from Giving USA. You can get the whole volume online if you want to read it. Unfortunately, there is a fee attached to it, but there's a lot of other interesting material there. And I just use it to illustrate some of the research we do and also how it has very practical importance in making philanthropy smarter. A few facts about the Lilly School. We were founded as a center just about 30 years ago. In 2012, we became the first school of philanthropy. We're headquartered in Indianapolis, Indiana. And we basically have three broad sets of activities. Teaching, we offer undergraduate, graduate, both master's and doctoral degrees, as well as certificates. We do a lot of research. typically on who gives, why, how, where, when. And then we provide a lot of service to the profession. Some of you may be familiar with the Fundraising School, which runs programs around the world for development officers, teaching new tools and techniques. We also have a growing international set of programs. We have provided instruction or worked with other organizations providing instruction, I think in virtually every continent except Antarctica, and under our Dean, Amir Pasek, we expect to be doing more in the future. A couple of other areas, we're very active in the public arena, both in terms of providing information for the media about trends in philanthropy. I myself have been spending a fair part of the past month or two commenting on the charitable giving of our presidential candidates. That's quite an interesting phenomenon. We also provide a certain amount of information for policymakers, Congress, the White House, and others. And last but by no means least, we sponsor or work with a library, which is one of the few, if perhaps the only library dedicated to the study of philanthropy, and its collections, including archival material, are open to the public. Over the years, we've had students go on to all sorts of things, both locally, nationally, and indeed internationally. I've just sampled some of them for you here. And our research has hit a variety of areas, including not only Giving USA, but the giving behavior of high net worth givers, which found out that entrepreneurs tended to be more philanthropic than people who inherited their wealth. We look at very large gifts. One of the findings that might be of interest to you that's come out of that, of the $1 Million List study, is that giving to international, for international purposes, usually comes large gifts from people who don't live in the country that to which their support is going. We've looked at fundraising costs and how those changed. We have been following with a panel created by the University of Michigan, the philanthropic behavior of a fairly typical set of Americans, finding, among other things, that people in their middle-aged years give more internationally than younger or older people. When disasters strike, the School of Philanthropy has become a go-to source to track philanthropic giving to disasters. And then through the research of our faculty and students, we've done a variety of things, including work in philanthropic psychology, nonprofit sector in various countries, including Colombia, and then the activities of international service groups like the Lions Clubs, particularly in China. We made a number of contributions to improving practice and fundraising. We work board development leadership, role of women, youth, and clergy. And then we also provide customized programs for professionals who feel a particular area they'd like to work on. We can customize a program as well, and we've been doing so. Let's see, this doesn't seem to be advancing. Maybe somebody at Wings can advance it for me.
Hello, we're on slide 10 now. Is this the correct slide, Les?
I'm on 9. I'm seeing 9 in front of me. Where did you see 10?
I believe it's showing up as 10 now. Maybe it's frozen for a second on your computer.
It might be. Okay. Well, I'm at the end anyway. So what's smarter philanthropy? we often talk about philanthropy as what one scholar called a habit of the heart, reflecting compassion, generosity, doing good, all those important emotional responses. But I think at the heart of Lilly Family School and many of the other academic institutions is that philanthropy is also a practice of the head, that it can be improved by being thoughtful, looking at effectiveness, finding ways of achieving success through research, teaching, and in other ways. And if we're on slide 11 now, I'll just leave it at that. I've left a couple of information points for you if you want further information, and that'll conclude my presentation.
Hello, Barbara. Hi, Barbara. You were on mute. I've unmuted you.
Thank you. And Les, thank you very much. If it's okay with everybody on the call, because we want to cover quite a bit of material in this hour, I'm going to move on right now to Jason Franklin. So please hold any questions or comments you might have for Les Lenkoswky. Jason represents a younger generation of professionals entering our field. If you don't follow him on social media, I recommend very much that you do so. He's currently and recently taken up leadership of the Johnson Center for Philanthropy at Grand Valley State University. He's very interested with how our field is evolving and changing, and he'll talk with us about applied training and about keeping up with a diverse and a changing field. Jason, it's over to you.
Great, thank you, Barbara. And hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining today. Can I ask there we go, I'm now the presenter, so we're good. So just a quick clarification. As Barbara said, I'm now at the Johnson Center for Philanthropy at Grand Valley State University. I'm actually not, happily, not our executive director. We have a new executive director, Kyle Caldwell. I serve as the first W.K. Kellogg Community Philanthropy Chair, which is a new endowed professorship established by the Kellogg Foundation and Kellogg Corporation jointly to focus on advancing the field of philanthropy with a particular focus on community philanthropy, collective giving, and how we give together. So I thought for the next few minutes I would tell you a little quick framing of the Johnson Center and our work, and in particular my work as the Kellogg Chair, but with a hope to kind of use both as examples of the potential impact of an academic center in applied research and applied training and field building work. So the Johnson Center is located in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in West Michigan. It is, I think, among the other oldest, after Indiana, research centers. We were established in 1992 with considerable support from the Kellogg Foundation at start as the Center for Philanthropic and Nonprofit Leadership. And then in 1999, we're renamed the Dorothy A. Johnson Center for Philanthropy in honor of Dottie Johnson, who is a longtime leader of the Council of Michigan Foundations, longtime trustee of the Kellogg Foundation, and instrumental in our founding. So in terms of the work of the Johnson Center, the way we frame it, we are very explicitly an applied center. So we look at envisioning a highly valued and effective philanthropic field that's equipped with both expanded knowledge and resources to advance the work of the field. In this case, we say advance the public good and transform communities. But the frame and the expectation and the aspiration of the Johnson Center is always around how can our work improve practice, and what does that look like? So when we think about it another way, why do we do our work? We believe that philanthropy is changing faster than ever and that learning curves shouldn't get in the way of impact. So being a resource alongside individual donors, foundation trustees, foundation staff, and nonprofit leaders and public officials so that they can understand the changing dynamics of our field to work as well as possible. And so we work to help them navigate that field, and using original research, tools, training, thought leadership is what we provide to them. When we think about our types of work, and this has been very consistent, I'll talk in a little bit about some work I've started doing around global community philanthropy, and as I talk with scholars and advisors and academic researchers in other parts of the world, very similar dynamics, but the types of work we do looks at capacity building for nonprofits, education for grant makers, research, both the design and analysis, and offering information and insights for the field. And one of the interesting things I think for the Johnson Center, like many of our counterparts around the world, is that we are both deeply local and aspiring to national and international impact. So a significant percent of our work at the Johnson Center is focused on Grand Rapids, West Michigan, or statewide in Michigan, while we also are looking at opportunities to be a resource nationally and internationally. And many of the research centers and researchers I've been talking to have a similar focus of a deep local focus in their city, state, or country, and then some connection and interest in broader regional or global trends. So I think we match that type of approach. In terms of the work here at the Johnson Center, we have four core programs. First is the programs, institutes, centers. You could define it in different words, and we're actually working yet again on our branding. Barbara, I'm just realizing you're not muted, and I think we're getting a little echo from your mic picking up my voice and then feeding it back. Oh, that's much better. Thanks. So first is our Institute for Foundation and Donor Learning. Inside IFDL, we have a couple of key programs. One is called learnphilanthropy.org. If you haven't had a chance to see it, I hope you will take a visit. It was originally started as a collaboration between the Council on Foundations, the Johnson Center, and a number of the affinity groups around the country. And it's really a repository for the many publications and resources that many different leaders in the field have been putting out as a way to find and access the resources of the field. So again, that's learnphilanthropy.org. We also operate the Grant Making School, which provides both in-person and online training for foundation staff and grant makers on everything from proposal analysis to financial analysis to due diligence to effective grant making strategy. And we publish the Foundation Review, which is the first peer-reviewed journal on philanthropy in the country. The IFDL also does a number of facilitation and consultation programs with individual funders or organizations, from the governor's Philanthropic Liaison Office here in the state of Michigan to working with individual foundations. Second, we have a nonprofit services program. Similar as Barbara's results shared for many others, we do consulting work through our nonprofit services program. That is really West Michigan or Michigan oriented at this point. Includes a wide range of in-person trainings as well as coaching and facilitation, from board training to governance to program design and development for local nonprofits and NGOs. We have our Community Research Institute, which also has been traditionally Michigan focused. And the Community Research Institute offers evaluation, research, data analysis, and mapping. So some of the bigger programs we do a lot of evaluation for the Kellogg Foundation for a number of local education and workforce development programs. And we run an annual survey called Voice GR, or Voice Grand Rapids, which is a widespread citizen survey looking at everything from health to education to economic outcomes for residents in the city of Grand Rapids to help inform both nonprofit leaders, foundation leaders, and the government about what are the needs in this community. And then lastly, we have our endowed chairs, both the Fry Chair in Family Philanthropy, and my colleague Michael Moody, who holds the Fry Chair, works on a wide range of family philanthropy issues, has done some great research on next-gen donors and young donors, also looking at the intersection of family business and family philanthropy, and organizes the National Summit on Family Philanthropy every other year. And then I'll talk a little bit about my work as the Kellogg Chair in Community Philanthropy. So I stepped into this role, it was created last year, so I'm actually my 1-year anniversary was last week. And the purpose of the chair is to advance the field of community philanthropy. And unlike some of the other parts of our center, very much an intentional focus to be both local, national, and international. And after working through and talking with many in the field, really have framed the question that is the ongoing kind of focus of the Kellogg chairs: how do we give better together and strengthen our giving to the communities we care about? So the Kellogg chair focuses on community philanthropy very broadly. This includes community foundations, but also giving circles and donor networks and funder collaboratives and intermediaries and the associations that are members of WINGS, all the places and spaces we come together to both learn about giving and move money together. And in terms of the work that I take on, this looks like applied research and scholarship, field building, thought leadership, and then teaching and professional education. It is not principally a teaching role. I teach 1 course a year here for our School of Nonprofit, Public and Health Administration. Unlike the Lilly School, as Les was discussing, the Johnson Center doesn't award degrees ourselves, but we are partner with our School of Public, Nonprofit, and Health Administration, which does award a number of undergraduate and graduate degrees. And then lastly, I just wanted to, oh, looks like I'm having the same problem of not being able to advance to the last slide. Let's see. 1 second. See if I can bring this all up for you. Okay. Well, if you could see the last slide, you would see that it has 4 of the key projects that I'm working on right now. So first is looking, and I offer them as examples of the type of work the Johnson Center does and that I'm working on, but also I think some of the examples of how can an academic center be a partner in applied research and building a field of philanthropy part of the world. So first we're doing a collaborative research. We're just getting off the ground looking at the scale, scope, variety, and impact of giving circles. Angela Eikenberry and Jessica Bierman did research on giving circles back in 2007. At the time, they found about 600 giving circles. These range from 5 people, friends putting in $100 apiece, to formal circles with 50 people putting in $500, or even very large circles of hundreds of people contributing and then making decisions together about where the money goes. These have taken off, both in the United States and around the world. Our first research is looking at giving circles in the US. We're estimating we'll find 1,500 to 2,000 circles operating today. And looking at what's the scale and variety of those circles, how are the different structures set up, and also a big question about what is their impact both on the donors who participate and on the communities that are receiving these funds. So how do the host institutions, community foundations, and intermediaries organize and run these circles? We've had a lot of interest from this, both from community foundations and others who want to start circles, the organizers of these 2,000 circles who want to learn from one another, and from funders who are being asked to support this type of work and wondering what is its impact long term. Second, I'm working with the Council of Michigan Foundations to pilot a benchmarking study for the 55 community foundations here in the United States. There are about 1,800 community foundations around the world. This is according to the Community Foundation Atlas developed by the Global Fund for Community Foundations, and is also a partner in creating that atlas. Of those 1,800, 55 are located in the state of Michigan. That's actually almost 15% of all community foundations in the United States are located here. And they do an annual data collection, and have for many years, asking how issues about grant making and assets and salaries and staff. We are now partnering with them to provide a deeper analysis of that data. What does it mean? And I think that that is often a contribution that academic institutions can bring to the field. It's not just the data collection, but the sense making. What does this data mean, and what are the implications for community foundations? Third is a project with the new Marshall Institute for Philanthropy at the London School of Economics and the Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors on their Theory of the Foundation project. This is a project initiated by RPA to working with a set of large private foundations to develop a essentially a planning framework for what does it mean to be a well-run foundation. Most of the conversation in philanthropy focuses on grant strategy. How do we make an impact with our dollars? And RPA is asking a question, well, how do we organize ourselves as institutions to be able to move our dollars well? So I'm working with them as the project director for the US part of the project around refining this theory and developing the tools and cases to make it useful. And lastly is an effort to link research and practice to strengthen global community philanthropy. And this partnership is principally with the Global Fund for Community Foundations out of South Africa, but increasingly looking to explore who else I can work with and how else the Johnson Center can be an ally. We are about to announce our first 13 small grants that we are funding. After a call for proposals, we received over 50 proposals from almost 30 countries. We're awarding 13 grants in 10 countries, projects ranging from looking at middle-class engagement in the Kilimani neighborhood in Nairobi, Kenya, to building social justice philanthropy in Brazil, to understanding local donor motivations in Romania. Each of these are a partnership between a local research partner and a community philanthropy leader or institution asking how can they advance their work, whether it's impact assessment or evaluation or exploration, to try to build the field of community philanthropy where they are. So hopefully those are some ideas to get you thinking about, what can be the possible impact and where the Johnson Center is going. And if there's ways that we can be a resource for all of you, I'd love to talk afterwards. I'll turn it back over to you, Barbara. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Jason. Our next speaker is supposed to be Michael Lippmann, coming to us all the way from Australia in the middle of the night. However, I don't see him on my list of attendees at the meeting. So I need some guidance. Jasmine, do we still have Michael with us?
He is on there as an attendee.
Yes, he is. I think he had to rejoin, so let me just make sure he's a panelist. One moment. Hi, Michael, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, wonderful. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Thanks, Barbara. Thanks, everyone. And yes, good morning from Australia. We're approaching 1 in the morning. Thank you for the opportunity to join you. I'll approach this slightly differently. I won't specifically spend much time describing the work of my center in all sorts of ways. Sorry, when I say my center, I was formerly the director and established what was called the Asia Pacific Center for Social Investment and Philanthropy at Swinburne University. I now have an adjunct professorship there. What I would like to do is briefly explain the rationale for bringing this into existence and the sorts of outcomes that we have sought and to some degree achieved. Just to personalize it a tiny bit, I spent many years working in the community sector and then was CEO of one of Australia's larger philanthropic foundations. And on leaving there, concluded that the sort of work that I and colleagues and donors and grant makers and trustees and the like, excuse me, were doing was work for which, paradoxically, there was really no opportunity for training, for practice learning, for collegial development, for thought leadership, and so on. And I liken the field of social investment, which is a term I prefer to philanthropy. It seems to me to be broader and recognize the reciprocal and transactional nature of the field. There are parallels between social investment and financial and commercial investment. In both instances, you're spending or investing a dollar for an outcome, but in one instance, the outcome is a revenue, a dollar outcome, and in the other instance, the outcome is a social benefit. It seems to me that the practice of social investment, where you invest money for social benefit, is for a range of reasons far more difficult than the practice of financial or commercial investment. And yet there are literally, I suppose, thousands of opportunities to undertake research, to get a degree and what have you, in commercial investment through MBAs and business courses and what have you. And at the time when I was thinking about this some 15 years ago, really not more than a handful, or perhaps a couple of handfuls, of opportunities to do academic work, practice development, collegial understanding, etc., in the field of social investment, which, as I say, I believe is harder and more challenging and arguably more important. And that was really the rationale for my taking this idea to a number of universities in Melbourne, in Australia, and ending up, interestingly, within the business faculty of a university in Melbourne. And I think it's been appropriate and relevant that we've been in a business faculty, and effectively, I guess, what we have done is establish what might be regarded as a specialist master's, or we have both a certificate and a master's program within the business faculty. So it's been for people who are broadly in the business sector, but they're also personal donors and what have you. But it gives a sort of concrete practice base to those people. That's basically the approach we've taken. I won't describe our work. In many ways it's similar, although I have to, being in Australia, it's on a far smaller scale than the other two operations that have been described, but there are many parallels in terms of our emphasis and our approaches. We have a degree course, we have a master's program, we undertake research, we do consulting, etc. And interestingly, we're also involved in a study, Giving Australia, which is very comparable to the study that Les described of Giving USA, although ours is funded in part by the government, and it's not an annual piece of research, unfortunately. This is only its second iteration over 5 years. But that's essentially the rationale for what we do. What I say to students, and it echoes, I think, what has been said by the previous speakers, is that although they're embarking on a major commitment to study, essentially what they're going to be thinking about can be reduced to 4 words. It disheartens them a little bit sometimes when it can be simplified to that extent. But I say basically they are about promoting outcomes, not intentions. That really, to me, embodies the whole purpose of this: effective philanthropy, effective altruism, accountability, the head-heart dilemma, all those issues that have been discussed. So that's effectively what we do. Just briefly, what have some of the outcomes of that work been? Probably one of the most important ones, I think, is the professionalization of philanthropic practice in our community. What hitherto has been a largely unsupported, feel-good area in which people have been doing important work without any real qualifications, sometimes just because they've been offered a position as a secretary of a foundation because of years of service in a company, etc. We have really transformed the field of grant making, I think, to one in which is recognized that that it's appropriate to expect professional standards of capacity and commitment in the same way that other areas of social practice are required. I think we have therefore helped the sector, and this is part of a wider phenomenon. We're really part of its zeitgeist. I don't claim that this is something which we have driven. It's part of a larger movement globally to move from feel-good to effectiveness, to accountability, to transparency. A very important development, I think. Of course, as a result, there's now serious practice, serious research in all aspects of philanthropy and social investment. Our work has generated, very gratifyingly, I have to say, for me, an enormously committed and enthusiastic alumni. And it seems to me that while in some senses our program is still a niche program, the people who undertake it are hugely committed. They know why they're doing this study or this research. And colleagues in the business faculty often remark that our students are, in fact, the most mature, the most thoughtful, the most focused, and the most committed. Interestingly, our alumni have also established their own fund. They wanted to practice what they preach, so they've established a fund into which they put money and around which they make decisions as to the distribution of that. A very important development now is that it's just been agreed that we can have an undergraduate minor in the business program, which I think is very important. It means that people who are not necessarily committed or involved in philanthropy but are embarking on a general approach to business study will have on the menu of ideas that they can consider the idea of social investment, the idea of philanthropy, the idea of corporate social responsibility, so it becomes incorporated into the offerings that are brought to the attention of undergraduates, which I think is very important. We are increasingly, or still at the somewhat early stages, but increasingly looking at taking our work beyond Australia, particularly in the Asian region. And we've been doing some interesting work in China, particularly around the areas of transparency and measurement, in which interestingly the Chinese are really well advanced and truly committed. And I think we are going to learn a lot from that partnership as well as contributing to it. Perhaps I won't say any more at this stage, thanks, but I'd be very interested in the discussion that follows. Thank you.
Michael, thank you so much for joining us in the middle of the night. We greatly appreciate that and hearing about how things have developed in Australia. I think now in the few minutes that are left, we should give a chance to those who are attending to ask a question, to make a comment. I forgot to mention when I was reviewing challenges that have been fed back to us through the survey, that many of you are saying finding qualified staff for your education-related institutes has been an issue for you. So that might be, for example, a topic that we could discuss in these remaining minutes. But I'm going to let Jasmine organize our Q&A. And do you want to let us know how that's going to work, Jasmine?
Yes, hello, this is Jasmine. So if you could send all your questions via the Q&A, so you can go to the top right-hand corner, it's like the Q&A icon, and then you'll be able to send your questions to everybody. So as you can see, we already have one question from Charles Keaton. Does everybody see that? Barbara, are you able to see that question?
No, we don't. I still have the slide on Kellogg.
Yeah, I think there's some issue with the WebEx itself. It's not updating the slides, but on the right-hand corner.
Yes, I see it underneath the Q&A.
I'll go ahead and say it out loud for those of you who don't see it. So Charles Keaton has asked, are there any downsides to so many philanthropic centers being situated in business schools rather than, say, philosophy schools in terms of research questions that are asked about philanthropy? Philanthropy, sorry.
Well, that would be a great one, I think, for Michael to address.
Thank you. That's interesting. I would actually rather argue it the other way. And are there any downsides to philosophy schools being insufficiently engaged with the work of business faculties and others? I would not like to see philanthropy hived off to the more remote arcane areas of philosophical discussion, but I certainly think that issues around social ethics and the like need to be far more incorporated into business schools.
Yeah, and I think this is Jason, just to chime in. I think it's an interesting question that Charles raises about, every discipline brings its own focus, it brings its own question and issue. I mean, the Lilly School being its own independent school, one of the things that has been always interesting to me about Lilly is that it is, by its very nature, interdisciplinary. The Johnson Center is affiliated with the School of Public Administration, Nonprofit, and Health Administration. And so we have, my background is in public administration, which colors my view and my questions. The Science of Generosity initiative, which is at Notre Dame, is at their College of Arts and Letters, and I think is among the ones that I would look at as more closely rooted in philosophy, asks some broader exploratory questions around the ideas and theories of self-giving and generosity and altruism. I think we're best served, frankly, with a variety of centers based at a variety, inside a different variety of institutions. The New Marshall Institute is at the London School of Economics, and they bring already in the conversations I've had with them, a quantitative rigor to their explorations, which I think is fascinating. And as somebody who's a qualitative person, I find it occasionally frustrating because it's not how I approach questions or what things that I ask. And I think actually that difference is really valuable for the field overall. But the more different perspectives we bring, the more it forces me to learn how other people are thinking and asking, and I think the more it forces our field to grapple with a diversity of perspectives and insights.
Jason, that really resonates with the way I'm thinking about this also, that the interesting things seem to be happening at the interface between the sectors. So social business, for example, here in Egypt, has become a very important way for people to address social problems, but to avoid getting caught up in the politics around NGOs, foreign funding, where the grant money is coming from, because they've got a model that is generating the revenue that they need to go to scale with solving whatever the social issue is. So I think business schools are a great place to put programs, but I wouldn't recommend that everyone do so. Do we have other questions at this point?
Hi, Barbara.
Yes.
Yes, we have one more question. Actually, I'll be able to unmute Fernando Nogueira. Apologies if I mispronounced that last name, and he can ask the question directly. Fernando, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, I thought it'd be better if I unmute you so then you can make any comments.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to know if you feel that funding comes mostly from traditional research funding sources, such as government funds, as is very common in Brazil, or from foundations that want to improve their practice.
This is Les Lenkoswky. I'd be glad to respond to that. Although the Lilly School obviously has a great deal of support from the Lilly Endowment, I think it is correct that from the start of our program, foundation funding has gone down. Instead, we see various kinds of contract research with corporations, less so with governments, but also a lot of support from individual donors and from tuition revenue, typical university revenues. And that's part of the value of having programs like this within higher education, that there is a sustainable mechanism of funding in higher education.
And Fernando, I would just to add on, I think Les, you're absolutely right, and you also, Lilly School benefits from having that tuition revenue that many centers, including the Johnson Center, doesn't have. We do get significant support from our university, but we have a mix of earned revenue through consulting and the grant-making school and the trainings that the nonprofit services does, so similar to tuition revenue, but also pure consulting and advising work, as well as grant funding. What I think is interesting, both Les and I are based at U.S. institutions, and in the conversations I've had with groups in Europe and groups in Asia and Latin America, is that both government funding does play a greater source. And on the foundation side, there's really two different types of foundation support, or three. There is local foundations who want to see a center created in their country or in their region or in their city, and provide that unrestricted support around creating the research or the training capacity within their community. There are foundations who will pay either consulting money or grants for services to improve their own practice. And there are a small handful of foundations that are funding the field building work. So the Mott Foundation, the Gates Foundation, Ford, and others that are, Kellogg and others that are making grants not for their own practice, but to build the field of philanthropy and the field of nonprofit services and nonprofit action. So I think it's important to kind of make those separations.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, we're nearing the end of our time, but I see that almost all of you have stayed with us for the full hour, which is terrific. And I'd just like to thank those of you who joined us from around the world. We'll be staying in touch with you at Wings as we go forward. I could tell that the last 10 minutes where we were really engaging around issues picked up. energy. So I would recommend that we, in the next, maybe in a few more months, hold another webinar on some of the issues that are raised by our mapping survey and from all of you about how to strengthen academic and education-based institutions and how we can do more together. So thank you once again to our panelists, to all of you who joined in, and on behalf of WINGS, I want to thank you again and hope we hear from you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. Just to remind everybody, this will be available, the recording of the webinar will be available on the WINGS website. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at jboeri, J-B-O-E-R-I, @wingsweb.org. Thank you again.
Bye now.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.